What happens when political rhetoric around immigration enforcement shifts from, let's say, spirited debate to actual deadly confrontation?
It's a serious question.
Yeah, and how do the sources we're looking at argue we fix the system when violence against the very people hired to uphold the law is, well, surging?
That's the crux of it.
We are taking a deep dive today into a stack of material that presents a pretty clear conservative blueprint for immigration reform. But first, we really have to synthesize this crisis moment, the escalating political violence targeting federal law enforcement officers. Our mission is to understand the connection the sources draw between, political messaging, the physical violence we're seeing, and the proposed policy solutions for restoring order.
And it's a chilling convergence, isn't it?
Yes.
Policy failure meeting, ideological violence. What's really fascinating here is how quickly the rhetorical opposition, which the sources describe as like systematic demonization, has, well, metastasized into physical kinetic conflict.
That grim reality really anchors our news hook for today. Let's start with that targeted attack on the Dallas ICE field office, September 24th, 2025. A gunman, 29-year-old Joshua John, fired from a nearby rooftop.
Yeah, tragic. Killing one detainee, critically wounding two others.
And the evidence found right afterwards. It points to a clear, unmistakable ideological motive, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. The sources cite federal officials treating this as an act of targeted political violence. They note an unused bullet found at the scene, and it was actually inscribed with the words anti-ICE.
Wow, anti-ICE, that's heavy.
It is.
And the sources are, well, they're unequivocal. This isn't some isolated incident. They frame it as the culmination of an already intense surge.
Right. Assaults directed at federal immigration enforcement officers had reportedly jumped by over 700%. Some sources even cite an astonishing 830% increase in violence specifically against ICE officials.
An 830% increase.
It's a staggering number. And this climate of violence comes amid, and the sources argue because of intense political opposition. You have prominent figures, including a congresswoman, referring to ICE as a terrorist force.
And this escalation also followed the tragic assassination of conservative activist Charlie Kirk earlier that month, didn't it?
That's right. The sources really frame this whole moment as a high-stakes test. It's the rule of law versus, political chaos.
It really is chilling how quickly rhetoric seems to have translated into physical action. Where do the sources draw that line between, legitimate political dissent and targeted chaos?
Well, they outline a pretty direct kind of three-part timeline linking the political messaging to the violence.
Yeah.
First, Washington Democrat Rep. Jayapal called ICE a terrorist force back on June 2nd.
Right.
Then, later that month, June 27th, all but 7 congressional Democrats voted against a resolution that was meant to condemn anti-ICE violence.
So the argument in the sources is that this lack of official condemnation sort of acted as a green light. What happened next?
Exactly. That perceived silence, the sources argue, it validated and intensified organized action. We saw organized agitators clashing violently with police and federal agents in Los Angeles. And in Broadview, Illinois, rioters were actually documented chanting, "Kill ICE, shoot ICE." Federal officers were forced to use riot control tools just to restore some order.
The material draws a really striking parallel to the 1970s here, doesn't it?
It does, and what's fascinating is the sources suggest this current wave isn't just like organic anger bubbling up.
Wow.
They see it as a recognizable historical playbook.
How so?
Where popular opposition is deliberately weaponized to trigger violence. It's similar, they argue, to groups like the Weather Underground back in the early 70s. They carried out something like 2,500 bombings over 18 months.
Wow.
Yeah. The core lesson here, according to these sources, is pretty clear. When prominent figures encourage extreme views and, demonize law enforcement, anger reliably escalates into violence.
But interestingly, the sources also suggest this whole strategy might be a massive political miscalculation for those inciting the chaos. The public, it seems, across the board, wants order.
And that's the crucial political angle, right? There was a national poll showing 59% of voters approved of deploying the National Guard and even federal military to restore order during those LA riots.
59%. That's significant support for intervention.
It's a clear signal, yeah.
Does the data break down support for enforcement more broadly, beyond just riot control?
It does, and this is maybe even more telling for the underlying immigration debate. 58% of registered voters back the effort to remove illegal immigrants.
Okay.
So this raises a critical question the sources pose. When political violence is tolerated, maybe even celebrated by some leaders, does it guarantee an electoral backlash?
And the data suggests.
Well, the data showing only 36% of Americans supporting the anti-IC demonstrations strongly suggests, a profound public appetite for stability and the rule of law.
Okay, let's pivot now from the violence itself to the underlying policy failure. The sources claim really started this whole mess. The material we reviewed presents a very clear conservative strategy, emphasizing enforcement first.
Right. The consensus, and this is clearly outlined by sources like the Heritage Foundation, is that the system isn't broken because we lack laws. It's broken because the executive branch systematically failed to enforce the existing laws.
Cool.
They argue this amounts to basically a betrayal of the constitutional duty to faithfully execute the law.
For listeners maybe not deep into legal policy, how does this failure to enforce actually manifest, like in practice?
The key mechanism they point to is something called prosecutorial discretion.
Right.
This essentially means the administration chooses to disregard large sections of immigration law. They opt not to pursue removal cases against the vast majority of illegal immigrants, letting them escape legal consequences.
So they're just not applying the law as written.
That's the argument. And policies like DACA, deferred action for childhood arrivals, and planned administrative amnesties, they just compound this, potentially giving temporary status to like 6 million unlawful immigrants.
So the sources say the first step toward real reform has to be the president securing the border and enforcing current laws. Firmly and fairly. Let's detail that executive checklist they propose. What specific practical enforcement moves can a president make immediately?
Yeah, the list is pretty precise, and it focuses entirely on the executive branch's existing authority. First, remove anti-enforcement directives.
Meaning
Immediately rescind every single executive order, every policy memorandum that disregards the letter, and importantly, the intent of U.S. immigration laws. Clear the slate.
Okay, that sounds politically challenging, but clear. What's next on the checklist?
Second, crack down on fraud. The sources detail how security measures were just ignored. For instance, employees at USCIS, that's U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, they faced pressure to basically rubber stamp DACA applications.
Rubber stamp. Wow.
Yeah. And asylum fraud was also rampant. One figure cited is that up to 70% of asylum cases back in 2005 had some indicator of fraud. The administration must restore integrity to these processes.
Okay. Third, they demand using swift removal tools. What exactly are they referring to there?
They mean widely using expedited removal authority. This is a massive streamlining tool that already exists in law.
How does it work?
It allows officials to quickly remove illegal immigrants who've been in the U.S. for less than 2 years without sending them through the massively overwhelmed immigration courts. This action, they argue, is key to shrinking that overwhelming caseload and immediately reducing the practice of just releasing illegal immigrants into the interior.
Got it. And finally, the focus has to be on criminals already here.
Absolutely. Target criminal aliens. Immediate removal has to be mandatory for all aliens convicted of any criminal felony or misdemeanor offense.
Is that happening now?
Well, ICE already focuses heavily on this. Their own stats show about 70% of their arrests target charged or convicted criminals. But the sources emphasize this needs to be systematic and immediate for all convicted criminal aliens. No exceptions.
We often focus just on the physical border, the line on the map. But securing the nation also requires looking outward, doesn't it? And ensuring our own government is being honest about its efforts.
That's absolutely vital. The conservative blueprint emphasizes the executive branch has to lead on foreign policy to curb illegal immigration at its source.
What does that look like?
Well, pressing Central America toward greater economic freedom, for one. Capitalizing on existing trade agreements like CAFTA-DAR, and building security initiatives modeled after successes like Plan Colombia.
But the sources also point out times when Congress itself seems to have undermined those very regional security efforts, right?
Yes.
Despite the clear need to stabilize those areas.
That's true. They cite congressional restrictions like withholding, I think it was 35% of security assistance from Honduras in FY 2014. Actions like that, even if based on other concerns like human rights, directly diminish regional stability and hinder security efforts designed to keep illegal flows lower. It's counterproductive from an immigration standpoint, they argue.
Okay, then there's the tricky issue of government transparency. DHS is accused in the sources of manipulating statistics to sort of feign enforcement. This sounds complicated. Can you break down the difference they're pointing to?
Yeah, this is critical for understanding the alleged deception. The administration at the time was accused of focusing only on one specific measurement of deportation called removal.
Okay, removals.
And those numbers were indeed high. However, the total number of people actually leaving the U.S., which includes something called returns, meaning people caught right at the border and turned back immediately, that total number was actually at its lowest level since 1973.
So they highlighted one stat while another dropped.
Exactly. By prioritizing these high-profile removals and ignoring the big drop in overall returns, the sources argue the administration was basically hiding the fact that interior enforcement had been consistently falling. It's like a statistical shell game, according to them.
So honest, transparent statistics are needed to actually prove enforcement success. And success, according to these sources, means a sustained decrease in illegal flows and a real, verifiable decline in the total illegal population living in the U.S.
Precisely. And this is key. Only once the executive branch proves its unwavering commitment to enforcing the existing laws should Congress even pursue legislative reforms.
So executive action first, then legislation.
Right. And those later reforms should then focus on things like strengthening border infrastructure, improving the legal immigration system specifically for high-skilled workers, and enhancing the E-Verify system to crack down on identity fraud in the workplace.
So here's where it gets really interesting, doesn't it? The sources seem to present a very clear choice for the country. Path 1, mass amnesty, which they argue just weakens security and the rule of law. Path 2, pure restrictionism and protectionism, which ignores, proven economic benefits of legal immigration.
Right. Cuts off your nose to spite your face economically.
And then path 3, what they call the wisest path. Uncompromising enforcement first, coupled with a robust, efficient legal immigration system.
And the core principle underlying that third path, the one that must be restored first, is simply the rule of law. The sources are crystal clear. A president who respects and fully executes the law is essential for even the first steps toward true reform.
Is a stark message.
It is. The material is unequivocal. America must not sacrifice being a nation of laws for the sake of being a nation of immigrants. The argument is that both concepts can, and absolutely must, be upheld through faithful execution of the law.
Okay, let's leave our listeners with this final thought, stemming directly from the sources. Given that these materials repeatedly suggest the surge in anti-ICE violence and disorder is actually backfiring politically on the left.
With those polling numbers, yeah. 59% approving federal intervention in riots, 58% backing removal efforts.
Right. Does that mean the commitment to uncompromising enforcement is not just, sound policy according to these sources, but also the most effective path to political power?
That's the provocative question they leave hanging, isn't it?
That certainly is. And that's something for you, the listener, to mull over as you process this deep dive.